So Oxford is a place. In some ways, it is a cosmopolitan place because partly because Oxford University has all these connections, but it's not just Oxford University. So we've got, for example, Cowley Road as well, which is now also a sort of symbolic place by now, as a sort of symbol for countercultural cosmopolitanism. The Cowley Carnival is coming up next week, and it's a multicultural event. So at the university, of course, lecturers and students come and go and have for centuries by now, from all over the world and also all over the UK. And they come from, obviously, from very different places in the UK as well. And Oxford also has a lot of people unconnected with the university who are also not originally from Oxford, both from elsewhere in the UK and from abroad. So that actually, having grown up in Oxford itself, being raised here and a sort of a real native, can even become a bit of a talking point in conversation sometimes. Like Paul, for example, is actually a native of Horsepath, which is to us somehow unusual even. And the university is old, of course, very old, but the Cowley Road community has also a certain weight of tradition by now, so these traditions also have been around for a while now. And especially when compared to Cambridge, Oxford has more strata and social diversity also, I think. It's slightly larger. It has there are the former ironworks and car factories and manufacturing that still goes on. Paul was talking about that earlier. So there's the university and other things going on in Oxford as well. And of course, despite that, there's still the other side. Conventionally, Oxford University is viewed as a bulwark. Is that the right pronunciation?
So yeah, it's a good word.
Stumbling across my German roots of English tradition, with all that implies. So what people think about Oxford, of course, is not necessarily cosmopolitanism. It's also the very English sort of thing. And in some ways, the university has been fighting to shed that image, I think. That's my impression as an outsider, because I'm not really inside the university. And I think in others it's still clinging to it. And there notoriously used to be a deep divide between town and gown, and that has lessened, but sometimes it still feels as if all these are different communities that only to some extent interact. And then, of course, there's the centre of Oxford, which is very much dominated by its history and these huge amounts of tourists, which the history brings. And that includes literary tourism as well. So there are lots of different literary traditions in Oxford by now. I think all of us probably think of different things in that context. And famously, there is actually a professor of poetry, which has its own amount of publicity, but there's also lots of other things going on. And now to come to the place where we actually are, this Botanic Garden, one of the reasons, well, partly because Vani said we wanted outdoor shots, and we wanted a boundary because of out of bounds. But also it belongs to the university originally, and it's the oldest in Britain, so it has this history thing of Oxford going for it. But it also has plants from many places over the world, so it has this international connection thing going. Of course, you can also start thinking about colonialism in this context, because in some ways it's a very defined relationship, perhaps not very open. But some of these plants these exotics have actually grown here a very long time, because it's such an old garden. And then there's the river outside there, which is the Cherwell, and it more or less is the boundary between the historic centre of Oxford on this side of the river and East Oxford, which is up there, which is a sort of different feel of place. So that was my thought of partly my experience, I guess, and partly just the cliches. And I thought that it might be possible to start from there. You came here as a student, didn't you? originally? You came here as a student?
I did, yes.
And is that a sort of picture you recognise of Oxford, was it?
I think that it was a long time ago actually. I graduated like 5 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And I've had a lot of reflection on it since.
Okay.
A lot of the things that you refer to in that introduction, like the town and gown divide and sort of Englishness versus its cosmopolitan. Yeah, those were definitely tensions when I was here as well. And I don't know how much the university was genuinely fighting the town and gown divide, or the sort of underlying conservatism that I think propels the institution forward. I think there's a genuine effort on the part of some sections of the university to be broader and more open-minded and to not kind of follow those traditions, but I think those traditions also would make the institution attractive, regardless of your leading. That's a fact, and that's a fact that I think people have to come to terms with and deal with, you know what I mean, in a more conscious way. And that's certainly what I had to deal with too. I certainly came to Oxford with like a certain idea. I picked Oriel College, which is, you know, like staunch old conservative college in the middle of the high street, because I wanted that experience. And then when I got that experience, I had to unpick it. So I don't know. Yeah, I can't really comment on what it's like now. And my experience was definitely like wonderful in some ways, in that I got an aristocratic model of education, but flawed in other ways, in that I'm a black queer person here in Oxford. So, you know, it's only going to go so far. That's my experience.
So what are the vestiges left of the you say had an aristocratic model of education? I mean, and you've unpicked it. I mean, what did it put in your head?
I think you just leave feeling deeply conflicted because you've come from one place and you've received an amazing thing, gift really, but it removes you from the community that you're originally in, and it's always a line between you and others, you know, when you mention it, and people can tell as well the way you speak and the way you behave. And so on the one hand it's great, but on the other hand it's somewhat alienating. I don't know what anyone else's experience is.
I think so.
Did anyone here study or come or live in Oxford? Did you?
No, I was thinking about my experience. I was thinking I'm not actually. It's something that it's like a thing that I nurse still, which was that I felt in a way robbed of a place at Oxford. I won't go into the story. And I really, and quite a long time later, I'm not over it, and coming here because of the town and gown divide, which looks a bit more substantial here than it looks in Cambridge, it irritates me constantly, it irritates me. I didn't come here, I came here because I wanted to move out of London because I had a child and it was dirty. And I thought Oxford's cosmopolitan. And I thought, I was doing some work for the Oxford University Press with dictionaries. So all of those reasons brought me here. And then I got really frustrated in a kind of general low-lying way with the town and gown. There's a sense that the bulk of Oxford city centre is hidden, is kind of wonderful, and it's not available to people who are not part of the university.
Yeah.
And that's...
Colleges own a lot of it, don't they?
Well, yes, exactly.
Yes.
And that is clearly, I haven't really faced it before. I'm much about that to myself. But and I think it's immature of me and silly, and I should have got over it by now. But I'm, in a way, talking about it in the way I am now is perhaps the first time, that it's something in me that happens to be exacerbated by the way Oxford is. So it kind of drives me nuts, actually. And sometimes I notice something which is something, it is, that concerts that I want to see, you see the tour and they don't come to Oxford. And I miss Oxford. So the poetry scene in Oxford, I think, is pretty healthy. But there's something else,
But again,
a bit
it's
moribund.
split, isn't it? There's half
split,
in the
yes.
university and there's half outside
That's
the
true
university.
too. That is true. Yes, that is true.
But I think it's interesting that you say the split is. I mean, it's less visible in Cambridge, but as it turns out, I've lived in
sure
both
it's there.
cities.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the reason that the split isn't there is precisely because there just isn't enough town in relation to how much town there is in Cambridge. It's just too damn small. So we really notice it here because there is a non-university element that's active and vocal and does things. Whereas that element is rather put down in Cambridge. So, I mean,
Closer link with the university, don't you? You have a closer link with the university, or did used to? When you
Yes,
said you
but
did
not
research?
Oxford Brookes, because Oxford does have two universities.
Yes, it's true.
Yes.
And people always forget that. They think Oxford is the university. But I did my PhD at Oxford Brookes, so it's my university.
And what you said actually did remind me. You said, the poetry scene is divided. I did go to a poetry, it was Kai Miller and at Albia Beatnik, and there were no backroom poets there. It was all people from the university. So I was like, Christ, these are people I've never seen before, and doesn't everybody want to come to this? I'm not,
But why was that?
I have no idea.
Well, I think
Really don't know.
the university
There's a division.
networks are quite self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I mean, the Oxford University, I remember we used to work as a group, occasionally we'd encounter Oxford University Poetry Society, and it wasn't that they didn't want to work with us, it's just that they had a bunch of funding and support and they could go where they wanted, and there was nothing really for us to add to them at the time, which I think was the... were you involved with the poetry scene yourself in Oxford at the time?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Both.
Well, it's a narrow age group too, isn't
You
it?
as a
And the
university
students.
thing, or Oxford in general?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the Oxford University poetry scene, it's quite a narrow sort of age band, whereas outside that, it's far more diverse. A lot of older people, middle-aged, older.
Yeah.
I guess I'm very conscious that the minute you start talking about Oxford, the first conversation that comes is about division and
Yeah.
resentment, and I think that's a very interesting thing because it seems to me like a symbol for a larger, maybe economic, social class dissatisfaction that is made very real, very stark. But on top of that, there is a kind of reason that people come.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So there's
Yes.
got to be something that we all love and desire and want. Otherwise, we wouldn't come to this city.
Yes. Yeah, I know, and I think there is, and I love it. I mean, I do, and I think I do love it partially because of, as you said, it's tradition, and also it's kind of, there's a certain avant-gardiness to it. It's kind of underneath the cord. It had quite an interesting music scene for a while in the sort of 80s and 90s. Radiohead, of course, but underneath all that sort of heavenly and things and that sort of deal. And there are lots of scenes. There is lots more going on for a town of its size, I suppose. For me, it feels like cheating. You've got the kind of the culture of a big city, the vibe of a small town, and the Cotswolds about 10 minutes away. So you've got kind of everything, really.
But the air is terrible.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Thames Valley is a tunnel of bad air from London. Yes.
Are you in
This is
London? In London now, then? Yeah.
I did get asthma soon after coming in.
I kind of have a different perspective on it to most of you, I think, because I was born here. There's a lot of people who aren't. Oxford is a place where people pass through, and although they often come back, they're not really part of Oxford in that sense. And I'm rather impressed, relatively speaking, and I suppose it is relative, as to how much more friendly the university is now than it used to be when I was young. So I guess it is, as I say, it's relative business, but and also from my point of view, I often wonder, there's no way of knowing, whether I would have been a poet. I came from an ordinary working class background in which that sort of thing wasn't very much encouraged. And Oxford, I often feel, has driven my interests. And you've got so much contact with so much culture that it can really change your life.
How did it specifically spur your interest in poetry?
That's a bit of a long, complicated story, but as such, no. It took something that I had an interest in and gave me the opportunity to see more of it, and through things like Backroom Poets, where I'm enormously grateful to them for the difference that they've made to my outlook on my writing. But I think you do imbibe an atmosphere from Oxford that if you were in another town, you would get something entirely different. So I'm personally grateful, and I love Oxford. I mean, it's a very strange city, and I come from the side of it that is more involved with the industry. And in the representations you get of Oxford, largely through things like Morse and Lewis, you get an entirely false perspective, because the Cowley Road and the car factory and indeed there was industry in Oxford before the colleges.
Well, it's interesting because those things do tend to turn up in those dramas, but they tend to turn up as a very kind of downgraded, kind of seedy underbelly.
Yeah.
This is the bad side of town, as opposed to being more integrated, which is what they are. Yeah, I mean, the first time I ever read anything out loud was in Oxford, and it was at Catweasel, which obviously is a very different.
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've got something like Catweasel, which just pulls things in from everywhere. You know, at the time, and it was in the Northgate Centre back when it was back before that became a chain restaurant, unfortunately. And
What?
I think it's or something, whatever it is
No,
now. It's not what it was. Yes. And yeah, so it does encourage that sort of thing. I think it can. There's all this self-starting stuff.
And I had a lot of friends that were connected with the university as well.
Yeah.
I got to know, to some extent, one of the professors of poetry. It's the kind of thing that wouldn't happen anywhere else.
No, that's true.
That's true.
That's true.
Which one?
John Wayne.
Okay.
I remember Paul Muldoon at some event in the Jericho Cafe. It was kind of in a very laid-back
Yeah.
sort of mode,
Yes.
and chatty.
And where else do you walk out of your local bookshop and bump into Seamus Heaney? Or
There is that.
it's
That is
a
true.
different world. And see quite well-known poets wandering around as part of the natural habitat. Almost.
The natural
There are
habitat.
quite a lot of poets who actually live in Oxford.
Yeah. Where it comes from. But then, a lot of poets of a certain type, let's say. So, I mean, if we're talking about kind of place and kind of vision and things, then there are different traditions of poetry.
Heathcote Williams.
A particular one is represented, yes. Which,
I would say there are poets of all types in Oxford.
So do you write about Oxford? No. You never have? Or even about your experience of being here or that?
I did a residency here once.
Okay.
At Community Garden, further up Cowley Road,
Oh, yeah.
and that was really nice. I read in a tent, a yurt, even,
Ah,
and it was really cool.
Yes, I've been there in that yard.
Yes, exactly. But in terms of my work, it hardly ever comes up. I think that's because it's it's really hard to write about it in a way that it does it justice. And also it's a bit of a weird blur in my life as well. It's not the most formative part of my life. I've needed a degree, basically.
Yeah.
and that sounds funny, but I did.
Yeah.
I actually came to university 2 years later than everyone else, and I was a mature student technically when I was here. So I was not. It wasn't the formative years. I'd done loads of stuff before coming here.
Right.
So it's this weird, funny kind of.
And you left as soon as you graduated as well?
Yeah, pretty much left the country. Actually,
Ah.
did you? Yeah, I went to live in Singapore for like a year, which was equally a weird choice.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't really complement my work very much, but increasingly I want to write about it, like, and to kind of like unpick what it really means and what it means culturally, what it means personally, and all of these questions. Yeah, because I think you're right. There's a lot that is really interesting and really good, and it's kind of like a magical. I mean, it's noticed like Philip Pullman's set his dark materials here, right?
Yeah.
Harry Potter, let's be real, is based on this kind of
Yes.
place, and there's a kind of charm and magic to that.
There
You know
is.
what I mean? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it always, a few years ago, when the signs of the bus celebrating the millennium, and you suddenly realise you're living in a place that's 1,000 years old.
Yeah,
And you know,
Yes.
there's really no answer in that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there are older places, but not in England.
Yeah, actually,
And sometimes you just see, things like the sun coming out over the Radcliffe camera, and you just go, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is that beautiful.
yeah.
Of course, once you start thinking about that and what the price is and what the background is, you can have a more skeptical attitude to that.
But there's
Still beautiful.
There's
The
always a-
beauty is still there.
But you're also going to ask what it conceals, because obviously we're in a political crisis right now,
yeah.
Yes.
instigated by boys who went to this university,
Yes.
and they're all in a photograph together, and they're
Yes.
also the ones who are kind of like impacting all of our lives now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's
Carelessly.
extremely
Oops, I didn't
carelessly
mean it,
and extremely
says Boris.
recklessly. Exactly.
Oh,
Like
didn't really want to leave.
precisely.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's interesting because it's become a sort of a dipping place for politics. You know, you go and you do the PPE and then you become a special advisor or something, and, and it's become this kind of the place where professional politicians start their journey as well. So it
But
has-
oddly enough, Oxford did vote to remain in the EU
Oh, yes.
Yes.
by a large margin.
Intelligent as well, it's not intelligence.
But
it's
so
vision.
that's a kind of contradiction of. It's just a certain section of the population that end up getting the prime ministerial jobs. How many prime ministers is it provided? Quite a lot of them since for a long time now.
yeah. So it doesn't.
Yeah. Oh, it's just, no, go on, because it's
So it doesn't even conceal it. I think it kind of shows itself as a place of.
Well, I don't know. I think you come in, you see the beauty, you go to hall, and you see the tradition, and you see all that. I think it does, to an extent, conceal it. It makes it extremely hard to articulate what the problem is, because it's so gorgeous. You know what I mean?
yes.
Yeah.
And even in my own interactions, like, I would be like, why is this such a strange interaction? There's a writer called Cherry Barrega. She's a kind of a Chicana, I think, writer from the States. But she went to an extremely wealthy, well-to-do college. She got in just through merit, I think. And she was like, why is it I feel crazy? Why is it that I'm around all of these like perfectly lovely people who are being perfectly lovely to me, and yet I feel insane? And that's the question that you have to ask yourself. And I think that the beauty is what creates that kind of slightly schizophrenic kind of like disconnect between what is going on and what you feel. You know what I'm saying? Like the messages that you're receiving.
Yeah.
So we all love Boris Johnson, right? But look at he's this floppy-haired kind of like
Like
character.
Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's a good analogy for what this place does. It's innocuous in so many ways.
Yeah.
There's this undercurrent of something that is really hard to detect.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just thought, when power, because I mean, no, that's sort of obvious, but when you said, how it distances you from people if you mention you went to Oxford, I found that completely unexpectedly, because I've looked at myself as somebody who's had a freelance career in publishing, because I was an actress and then I had a child, and so I just sort of getting by. And just, it's been bumbling from one thing to another, but in the course of it, it's like a rolling stone. I gathered some interesting moss, and I did work for the dictionaries. Now, I discovered in foreign countries, without realising that it was a loaded thing to say, if people said, where do you work? And I said, the Oxford Dictionaries. They practically fell on their knees in front of me. Now that's power, isn't it? That's power. I think that's what it is. It sort of shimmers somewhere in this place.
Don't you think
And
the
it's got all
university
sorts of
exploits
depth. Oh, God, yes.
that? I mean, they're always
No
trying.
question.
I mean, they wouldn't exist if they couldn't sell themselves abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dictionaries certainly do, for example. They pay very badly because they know you should be
It's
grateful.
kind of the power of the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sort
Exactly.
of judgment.
It is.
If Oxford says it's right, it must be right.
That's right.
They were talking about the beauty of the place and the buildings and all the rest of it, but growing up here, that just seemed normal to me. That was the town I lived in. That's what it was like. It never really occurred to you to question it. But I've always often think now when I see tourists going around gawking at things, that they're looking at the wrong thing, because what Oxford really is what's going around in people's heads. It's more to do with that than it is the buildings. The buildings are a secondary thing, but okay, very nice, but it's what people think and the extraordinary things that have been thought here over a long period of time that always occur to me.
Which is why, so you carry it with you.
Yeah.
Well, I would say more that's. I think you're right, but the two are connected. That
Yes.
your psychology is impacted by a place like this. You are encouraged to think big thoughts in a way that if you live in, Thornton Heath and Croydon, and then you're at the local college, you're not necessarily. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do think architecture really does have
does.
it does have an effect. I've thought a lot about that.
I think there's a reason that these things are built the way they are. They're like little cloisters with like staircases and little hidden bits, and like the rooms are absolutely stunning. Like, giant fireplaces and windows that overlook. Like, of course you're gonna have a different mentality, right?
You feel good about yourself. I deserve this. Here I am.
Yeah.
Totally.
Not a tiny box with
Yeah.
water pouring down the wall. Yeah, actually, there's something that's been on. Since you mentioned Philip Pullman, which I think it'd be interesting to look at too. The thing that has surprised me about Oxford too is these places like Donington Bridge. If you go down the bridge into the meadow, you're suddenly in the middle of the country. You've gone off a massive road with traffic. You're at the water meadows, and we're at Port Meadow.
Yeah.
And then, what's it? Oh God, where is it?
Well, up in
You
Headington,
turn
you've got Shot Over Hill. Which,
You've got shot over, but right in the middle of the city, like go along the Botley Road, turn right, you know where I mean.
Yes.
That you come to a little village in a mile and a half, I've just forgotten it. But it begins with B. Anyway, so Oxford has, that I can think of, at least 3 places that seem to be right in the middle of a busy city, that are just like infinite country. And then I thought, Philip Pullman, C.S. Lewis, these magical changes, and I thought that it has that as well. And it's not only that, I wrote a little thing, somebody for Arts Week a few years ago did a mock-up of an imaginary newspaper for some reason 30 years' time. I don't know why she went into the future, because it wasn't a very futuristic newspaper, but she asked people to write articles. I did write an article about people suddenly disappearing sort of on Sunderland Avenue, and small creatures, coming through, and children being stuck with their legs out of a sofa. Because it's got this weird, it invites the imagination to kind of canter, doesn't it?
But those green spaces are an expression of the city's power. In any normal city, they'd have been built on already.
That's
the
true
only
too.
reason they haven't
Yes, that is true too.
because there are interests in keeping it the way it is. So,
And those green spaces are kind of like symbolic within each college, because you have these quads that are
yeah.
pristine,
Yes.
kind of.
Yeah.
And grass you're not supposed to walk on. Well,
Yes.
you can walk on it if you're imported, can't you?
I've come to realise the strangeness of Oxford, really. When I was younger, and for most of my life, it just seemed the place I lived. But you do realise, after a while, I married somebody who came to Oxford to work in the university, and I realised through her that this is a strange place. Her reaction to it was entirely different to mine. What was normal to me, she found quite different.
Isn't that the case with every place? Like, I grew up in London, and plenty of people come and they find it strange. Like, if you live somewhere, it's always going to seem normal to you, but that doesn't mean privilege and prestige.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to realise that more as the older I get. But it isn't really an old place.
Yeah, there's certainly a sort of magic to the name Oxford, which people can even use when they're not trying to.
Yes, it still feels odd explaining to people.
Like I work for a dictionary, so just because it's got the name of Oxford in front of it, it has more authority. And people don't necessarily even need to know much about it.
Just impressed.
And I think there's just one dictionary, don't there? The Oxford
Well,
Dictionary.
it sort of is now, isn't there? There was a moment when they were scared of the colonies.
But dictionaries are prescriptive, they're not prescriptive,
They're
they're
descriptive,
descriptive.
yeah.
In
And
theory,
people think
yeah.
they're prescriptive.
I know.
The argument for dictionary definitions, absolutely. But it's interesting that you haven't written about it and now you sort of want to. How are you approaching that?
I think in the context of the Roads Must Fall campaign, I don't know if you've heard of
yes.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
Yeah, I think that's been a really interesting campaign because on the one hand it uncovers, like we were saying, the history behind this place and the power that it conceals. It both reveals and conceals, I think. And on the other hand, again, well, most of these students are students here, so I'm kind of like, why did you come here? You know, you are also seduced by this power. That's why you've come. And I think that's a really interesting position to be in. Do you know what I mean? Like to be an alumni of the college that is being directly critiqued, and they were sending all these emails around, being like, you know, we know that you've all heard about this and whatever, and people withdrawing money, and so there's this like mini crisis that happened in this college that I used to go to, where I had many of the same thoughts as these people who are critiquing it, but also I'm here, so I didn't have to come here. Also, why am I here then? Do you know what I mean?
And you knew about the statue, but you didn't.
I didn't know about it until I got here,
Oh, right. You did. Okay.
because it's not very obvious.
No.
If you look at the top of Oriel,
Yeah.
Cecil Rhodes is right at the top, and then he's also on the road just next to it.
Right.
Where that bar used to be, I can't remember if it's the same bar now, but and there's a staircase as well where he is as well, somewhere inside the college, so it's not obvious at all.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what I mean about this concealment plus this kind of like promotion sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's very conflicted.
Yes. And it's interesting. It sort of suddenly happened then. I think what kind of broke it out.
Well, because there were protests in South Africa.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Do any of you guys write about Oxford? I'm afraid I haven't.
Not in the way, not Oxford as a university. No.
No, I don't think even as a place. So,
Strangely enough, no, I agree, not very much. No.
And why is that?
It's up too close, I expect.
I mean, I don't think
I write about more ordinary bits of it.
Yeah.
You have written about your village.
Yeah,
It doesn't necessarily have that name, but it's very obvious that it's Horsepath. I've written about various places in and around Oxford. I don't know that I've necessarily addressed in any great depth any of these issues. Sort of stray remarks about the St. Cross building. You know, the library, which is basically just a cement block, and still embodies all these books and stuff.
Where the English department is.
Where the English department and the English faculty library is.
I liked it.
Yes. I actually wrote a happy poem about the St. Cross building, and then not a major in-depth work, but saying, look, I'm outside this building that probably everyone would agree was not a beautiful part of Oxford, and just at the moment I happen to be happy. which is not, of course, not. I don't know about how much that says about sense of place. We bring our personal history, what things happen to us in places, to these places, I think. So when I write about Oxford, it is the setting for things.
I think it's the same with me in choosing my poems for this evening. Really, it was less about the place than what happens to me in the place. It's the place sort of sinks into the background.
Yeah. I'm sort of mildly interested. I mean, having kind of started to think about this, we were talking about why I almost never
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
write poems of place, and whether that's possibly because I've moved around a lot, or possibly because I'm of a sort of background. I mean, I did have a sort of relatively sort of privileged education, an upbringing where it's possible that you can only write about a place from its borders once you've mapped it out. I mean, there's an interesting, I think Jay was saying about, feeling that tension between two things is where you start to unravel and have to write about it. And if you've never felt that tension because you're of a class or background or whatever where you sort of belong, then you can't. It's harder to see the map of it.
See the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that maybe part of the reason is it's really hard is because maybe it's hard in the same way that it's hard to write about the royal family.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's like it's such a obvious, gigantic, massive thing that you don't fully comprehend anyway. You think you do, but you don't. There's not a huge amount to say about it. Do you know what I mean? Like the job of being poet laureate and writing about the birth of such and such a child. It's like, what is there to say really?
Yes.
Besides expressing your
Yeah.
low-level contempt for
See, I think that's why Ted Hughes just ignored it all and went on writing poems about dead ferrets, because it's...
which is more interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose in a way it would inform everything one does, but it doesn't necessarily always become the subject.
Yeah.
Because having been through that, you come out, I suppose you were saying one comes out another person in a way, not entirely obviously, but slightly different. And changes of place do that to one. Oxford especially, I suppose, but any place you live in for a time.
I don't know, going away and thinking about the dead ferret theory of the royal family. That's great. I like that. That's got some mileage, I'm sure.
Actually, you did sort of start me thinking now about place, and I won't say a lot, but I've thought that I always described myself to myself as somebody who didn't have roots because we moved so much when I was a child. And I feel that possibly I'm naturally nomadic, because I notice that sometimes, when I'm travelling, that's really all I want to do. I don't know, I have a sort of resistance to place, I think. It really, when I was a child learning geography, it's like, I don't care what they do. How is that relevant to anything? So and I also recall, not understanding for a long time that I was physically apparent to other people, really, not really getting it. I had to start to try and tell myself that when I was a student. Actually, I'm waiting now. You apparently are affecting people. What? So all of those things come together for me in a sort of, I've almost got a slight aversion to thinking about place in a way as if it was meaningful to me. But it is, of course it is. It's terribly. So that's, you've kind of set something rolling just asking that.
I think that's a really interesting point. And maybe if you don't mind, expand on what you mean by that.
What?
On you were apparent to people, you were having an effect.
Oh my God, I just didn't think I was... I didn't behave as
Did you
if
think you were invisible?
I didn't think, obviously I didn't go...
Did you feel?
Yes, I appeared to be invisible to myself, so that I mean, it was of the guy, obviously. These, you know, lots of these things happen in intimate relationships. But I realised that whereas I just thought he'd been affecting me, actually I'd been affecting him, and I had no idea. I think those kinds of relationships polarise whatever's going on in you. But I did then realise, well, I had to coach myself. Look, imagine you're a person other people can see and feel and hear you, and I was like, no, you know. So and I think some human beings are more inclined that way than others.
And you were an actress, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is. It was all quite contained.
It's all
then.
about visibility.
It is all about visibility and being felt and heard. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And finding out and finding other identities as well.
Yeah.
Just exploring.
And what change did it make to how you interacted when you realised that you were having an impact on other people?
I think it's part, you know, it's like erosion, isn't it? It's a drip, drip, drip. It's possibly a little faster in a lifetime. But I think it began to perhaps make me what would look like more responsible, what would look like more thoughtful, you know, more not empathic, because if I wanted to, I could imagine how anybody felt, but it was only if I wanted to. I didn't realise that it was part anything to do with me. So yeah, I think just part of the whole process of trying to be human.
to apply that to place, or to apply that to this, we think that this place affects us, and you know,
Yes.
it somehow is doing everything, and we somehow don't have any impact on it.
But I think also that whole thing of I'm not really here is if that's a feeling that's quite strong, then some bit of you wants to escape being really here all the time, like, no, I'm just a free part of the whatever it is. So the notion of associating with place is like anathema. It's like, no.
And I think,
yeah.
so I think because we're getting towards the business of being embodied, being a body in a space. And
Yes. Yeah.
sort of returning to Oxford is because you're encouraged to live a life of the mind, and if you're already that way inclined anyway, you're very cerebral, you start to think of yourself as a brain that has a body that you're just dragging around with it, as opposed to a body in a place that interacts, which is, I think, perhaps what...
I mean, it depends on who you are, because I certainly was very aware of myself as a body in a place.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really forget that you're a body, and that people are having reactions to you, if you know me. So yeah, but I do know what you mean, because like I think I had a really similar experience of feeling like it didn't matter what I did, because what I did was not as powerful or as strong as what somebody else did.
Yes. I think we often do that in relationships. There's that the other person is like some monument that's affecting us. Well, this happened. Well, you know, she said that. It's like, yeah, no, there's the person over there that's being affected as well.
And it's such a shock when you're like, oh, wow,
Oh.
you're upset by that.
We seem to have had it happen in a major way, haven't we? That a lot of people thought it didn't matter what they did.
Yes.
Oh my God, yes.
So, yes.
A lot of people do it.
And now, and that really, like, I think on both levels, on a psychological level, on a personal level, but also on a physical level, makes you question then why they made that choice. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I
If
do.
it didn't matter what you did, why did you make that choice?
Well, people have said they did it as a protest. I think people needed coaching about what a referendum is, didn't they? You can do a protest in Whitney because it's only ever going to be Tory, but not in a referendum. I think coaching was missing. Something.
Coaching was what was there. Well, you know, the lack of coaching was what made it that result. You know, that's what they wanted.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think so. I think we get... Sorry, I mean,
I don't
we're
know
into a
how
very
many-
long
I don't know
topic
how
here
many
about
people
things.
were doing a protest.
So I think we skirt dangerously close to saying that you know, if people were more informed, they'd have voted as we did. But,
There are a lot of people who said I didn't want to leave. It was
Yeah.
a protest vote, but so I don't know how many there are of those. That's all. At least it had been fairer.
I wasn't trying to imply that everyone felt like that, but you did get the impression that quite a lot of people did have the impression that they could utter something and not have it have any effect.
Yeah.
But I think it's also coming from polls that there's quite a significant percentage the other way as well. People who voted Remain who felt I wanted to vote Leave, but I thought it wouldn't matter, so I voted Remain
really?
instead because
Oh,
I knew I wanted to vote something I knew I couldn't win.
Oh, I
I'd have voted Leave if I'd known they were going to.
How weird. weird.
Yeah, so
That's really weird.
yeah, about 4%
I can
one way.
see it the
7%
other way. I wanted to complain, and I thought Remain would win, so I complained.
With,
Oh well,
yeah.
people
You've
are
opened
odd.
Pandora's box, haven't you?
No, I think, yes, that's a different story, isn't it?